Chapter 21 Sticky Notes. The case study is about Germany and how it's going solar. Germany leads the world right now in renewables, wind and solar, and they're doing so many things to switch their economy to renewable energies. They are a model that we could look at and see what works. And they have the strongest economy in Europe too. All right, so this chapter is about new renewable energy sources, which really, it's kind of sad, but they make up a very small proportion of our electricity portfolio in the world and in the US. So renewables is only about 13% of all of the electricity. And renewables is not just solar and wind, but it's also geothermal, like bioenergy, and hydropower is renewable, because as long as you have a good water cycle going on, you have renewable there. Okay, so biomass that is incorrect. Nope, it's correct, sorry. Biomass, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. So biomass in terms of energy is the largest renewable energy source, because we're including in here transportation and ethanol. So the largest renewable energy source is going to be bioenergy, and the largest electricity renewable source is hydropower. And those are two stats you need to know. So many times students focus on solar and wind that they forget about hydropower and bioenergy because they forget that they're renewable, but they are renewable. Okay, so do know those two stats. Okay, 585 talks about what governments can do to promote renewable energy. So remember, governments can do certain things in a democracy. So we're talking in particular the US government. In a democracy, it can do certain things and it can't do certain things. So what are the things that we can do to help promote renewables is we can fund research and development. We can end subsidies for fossil fuels and instead subsidize solar and wind. We kind of do this in California a little bit, but we don't do this on a nationwide scale. There are still huge subsidies for coal and oil and natural gas in the US. We can do what's called a feed-in tariff policies, where utilities pay premium dollars by law for renewables, and renewables get priority to be sold first. Germany does this, and what it does is it encourages farmers to turn parts of their land over to solar farms, and then they are guaranteed income by, so in other words, they're not going to lose their money by putting in solar panels on their farm. Yeah. Okay, so just so you know also that solar panels is not the official word on the AP test. We call it photovoltaic cells or PV cells. So tax rebates for PV cells, for photovoltaic cells, which are solar panels, or wind in the home. So if you put those in, you get tax credits. We do this in California. Net metering means that homes with solar and wind can sell that extra kilowatt powers to the utility companies. We do this in California. They just stopped this in Nevada, and it's decimated their renewable sales. It's pretty sad. Okay, going to 587. All right, so solar is not just solar panels or photovoltaic cells. Solar is a lot of different things that you need to know. All right, so we have passive solar techniques. So you can utilize the sun for your house by doing things, positioning the way a house is built. Now, you all live in homes that aren't built this way, because we don't do very well with this in suburbia. But if you buy a piece of property and you build a house, you can do certain things. So you can build your windows to the south to capture sunlight in winter and warm your house naturally without using heating and cooling, because the south is toward the equator, and so you actually get more intensive sun facing south. You can put overhangs on your windows to shade for the summer. You can also, if you live in a cold climate, so you wouldn't really want to do this very much in California, but if you live in a colder climate, you know, Wisconsin or Washington State, you can use bricks and straw sounds weird, but it's actually inside your walls, packed very closely so it's not at risk of fire. It's called a straw bale house. It's a very interesting kind of a house. We actually have a straw bale house in Santa Clarita. It's actually a building. It's the bus headquarters over off of Copper Hill by the Walmart. Over there is a City of Santa Clarita transit building, and it's a straw bale building. It's an eco-friendly building. So the more plants you have around your house, planting vegetation to buffer temperature swings. So the more plants you have around your house, it's going to cool it in the summer and it's going to heat it in the winter, or prevent energy loss. Okay, and then we can take active solar. So we can collect the heat from the sun in water, air, or antifreeze, and then pump that through the home. And so we call them solar collectors, and here's a picture down here of a solar collector. And we just collect the energy from the sun, again, and pump it through the house. You can use it, as a hot water heater. People do that. It's called a solar water heater. Or they just pump that air through their house to warm their house in the winter. And so that's called active because it uses a pump. So passive solar techniques do not use any energy to distribute that heat. It's just the way that you position certain things on your house. Active solar collects the heat and then uses a pump to pump it through the house. Other types of passive solar would be a solar cooker. We will build these after the AP test. And then this is, let me move this over a little bit, but concentrating the sun's rays, first is a solar cooker, which is portable ovens, but also this is a power plant. And so this figure and caption refers to the power plant. But it's basically where you concentrate the sun's rays. So you have here a boiler with water, and all of these mirrors focus the sun to here, and it superheats it. And so it boils the water to spin turbines, just like a coal power plant does, except there's no emissions and there's no greenhouse gases. And they're all timed so that as the sun moves across the sky, the mirrors will turn to follow the sun. They are extremely hot. Now, if you've ever driven to Vegas recently, right in the desert, on the California side, right before the border, you will see these, and you will see this is extremely bright. One of the problems with these is that when birds fly through this, they get fried. It's so hot, but that doesn't happen very often. All right, so this is a solar energy plant. It's for electricity, produces a lot of electricity without solar panels, without photovoltaic cells. Okay, so we're doing a ton with solar without being photovoltaic cells. But now let's get to photovoltaic cells. So this is what kids think of when they think of solar, but it's not the only solar. So photovoltaic cells are what we have in the Saugus parking lot, and some of you have on your homes. And basically light strikes a silicon plate, which releases electrons that are fed into wires, and that's the simple answer to a photovoltaic cell. So again, the AP test will not call them solar panels, they will call them PV cells, photovoltaic cells. 591. Solar energy is really fast growing, but it only supplies a small proportion of the U.S. electricity, 0.02%, although this may be wrong. That's an old number. I'll have to look up a new number. You don't have to know the number. You just need to know that it's still small. It's not a huge proportion of our electricity. All right, so let's say you got PV cells, and some of you do have PV cells. And if you're still connected to the electric grid, there's some benefits to that. So in California, you can sell power back to the power companies and make a little extra money. If you don't have enough PV cells at your house, you can still buy some power, especially in the summer with air conditioners, from the grid if you need more electricity. So that's the advantage of being on the grid. Now, if you buy a house way out in the boonies and you don't want to pay for being on the grid, then you definitely need a battery system to store power for night, because there's no sun at night and you can't turn on your lights without the sun. Most people, when they get PV cells, they get a battery anyway. So again, these are really good for rural areas where connecting to the power grid is expensive. And so if you buy a house and you dig a well, and you might not want to spend the money to connect to the grid. All right, turn 2 pages to 594 and some drawbacks to solar. So some places aren't sunny like Seattle, although we have better PV technology now that even in Seattle people can still use PV cells. But in Seattle they don't really need to because they have almost all their electricity is from hydroelectric dams. And then the upfront cost of the equipment is a drawback. So you have to buy it or lease it. Now they're becoming more affordable lately. A lot of people will rent the PV cells in Santa Clarita, and the rental price is less than the electricity cost of buying it from the electricity companies. So you end up saving money as a family. All right, so now going on to wind power. So wind power is very simple. Basically, there's a turbine. It's being turned by a windmill, the blades, and then you have the generator. So same concept, turbine, generator. For wind, China leads in the most wind power from the wind. So they have the most megawatts, you can see, of power from wind. 27% of all the wind power in the world is produced by China. The US is second, and we are increasing dramatically with wind production. But in terms of the highest percentage of their own electricity from wind, you can see 30%, almost 30% is of their own electricity is made by Denmark. So offshore wind is most consistent. So you can see here's a wind farm offshore. People don't really like offshore because they don't want to go to the beach and see wind power out there. So it's not the most attractive, but it is the most consistent. Here's our drawbacks to wind power. Sometimes it's not windy, and if it's not windy, you're not generating power. This is why you're still, even with wind and solar, you still need other sources of electricity for our baseline power that we talked about in chapter 19. You have to have a constant flow of electrons through wires into people's homes and buildings because sometimes, again, it's just not windy. So what do? So coal may never go away, or hydroelectric may never go away, or natural gas, because we still need to make sure that we have a constant supply of electrons. NIMBY, not in my backyard. Oh, I love the idea of wind, but I don't want it around me. I don't want to see the windmills. Now, some people feel that way. I personally don't. I like to see windmills. Another problem is birds and bats fly into blades, and you know, it's not very good, especially since bats are having trouble lately, and they're super important for pollination and for ecosystem services. They eat bugs for farmers and they pollinate, and so we want to make sure we don't mess up our bats. The next type of renewable is geothermal. So geothermal is basically groundwater heated by magma, and so this is just natural heated groundwater. We don't have to do anything to heat it. It's just naturally heated. So we can actually pump that heat through homes and buildings. They do this in parts of Paris. They've done it for centuries. They just use that heat from under the ground and pump it through buildings to heat the building. Or we can create a power plant for electricity. It does produce a little bit of hydrogen sulfide gas, not much, which is an air pollutant. Iceland leads the world because they basically sit on top of a volcano and they can access that steam. And it is renewable unless you overpump your aquifers. So let's go ahead and look at the picture here. So this is the power plant. So you have this natural steam. See here, the magma comes really close to your aquifers. It creates the steam, which they then use to spin the turbines. It has a little bit of hydrogen sulfide gas, not much, not like coal that produces a ton of sulfur dioxide, but a little. So if you don't if you're using this water for other sources and you pump it dry, then it's not renewable anymore. But as long as you protect your aquifers, it is renewable. And then here's Iceland. So Iceland uses this extensively. Almost all their electricity is from geothermal because they have it. They have a ton of geothermal availability there.